The alarms screamed through the small research ship, and Jake Martinez knew they were going down. His hands moved across the controls, trying to stabilize the vessel as it shook violently. The ice planet below them filled the viewport, a world of endless white and gray storms. Hull breach in Section 3. Sophie Hayes called out from her station. She gripped the edge of her console as another impact rocked the ship. "We're losing atmosphere fast." Jake had flown through worse situations during his time in the Marines, but this was different. The Frontier was a research vessel, not built for combat or emergency maneuvers. Whatever had hit them had torn through their shields like they were made of paper. "Get to the escape pod," Jake ordered, his voice calm despite the chaos. "Now, Sophie." Sophie didn't argue. She released her harness and stumbled across the tilting floor toward the rear of the ship. Jake set the autopilot to take them away from the populated areas below. The last thing he wanted was to crash into one of the alien cities they had come here to study. The ship lurched again, harder this time. Jake felt the controls go dead under his hands. He abandoned his seat and ran for the pod bay. Sophie was already inside the small emergency capsule, strapping herself in. Jake dove through the door and slammed his fist on the release button. The pod shot away from the Frontier just as the main vessel began to break apart. Through the small window, Jake watched the ship that had been his home for 3 months tear itself to pieces in the atmosphere. Fire bloomed across the hull, bright orange against the gray clouds of the planet below. "Brace yourself," Jake said, tightening his own harness. The pod had minimal controls, designed only to get survivors to the ground alive. It wasn't meant to be comfortable. The entry was rough. The pod shook and rattled as it punched through the storm. Ice formed on the outside of the window, blocking their view. Sophie closed her eyes and gripped the armrests. Jake kept his eyes open, watching the altimeter drop. They hit hard. The pod bounced once, twice, then skidded across the ice before finally stopping. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jake unbuckled his harness and checked the pod's systems. "We're down," he said. "You okay?" Sophie nodded, though she looked pale. "I think so." "Where are we?" Jake studied the small screen. "About 200 kilometers from the nearest Terezi settlement. The storm is blocking our emergency signal. It might take a few days before anyone can reach us." He popped the hatch and freezing air rushed into the pod. The temperature readout on his suit flashed red. -60 degrees and dropping. The wind howled across the ice, carrying crystals that stung any exposed skin. Sophie climbed out beside him, her breath forming clouds in the air. "My suit took damage in the crash," she said, pointing to a tear along her left arm. "The thermal system is failing." Jake checked his own suit. A crack ran across the chest plate, and he could feel cold air leaking in. "Mine too. We need shelter." They were standing on a vast plain of ice that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The only break in the flatness was a low ridge of pressure ice about 100 meters away. Jake grabbed the emergency pack from the pod and led Sophie toward it. The wind fought them with every step. Sophie stumbled and Jake caught her arm. Her suit was definitely failing. He could see her shivering even through the heavy material. They found a shallow cave in the ice ridge, barely deep enough for 2 people. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind. Jake set down the pack and pulled out the survival kit. 1 thermal blanket designed for emergencies. 1 small heating unit, but its power cell was nearly dead. Some ration bars and a water recycler. "We can last 3 days if we're careful," Jake said, laying out their supplies. "Maybe 4. Someone will come for us." Sophie sat against the ice wall, hugging herself. "Jake, I need to tell you something about the Terezi. They're the species that lives on this planet. I know. Crystal-based life forms. We were here to study them. It's more than that." Sophie's teeth were chattering now. "They communicate through heat. Physical contact is very important to their culture, very sacred." Jake pulled out the thermal blanket. It was meant for 1 person, maybe 2 if they stayed close. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because there might be Terezi nearby. They have scouts that monitor the surface. If they see us..." She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. "Sophie, we're going to freeze to death if we don't share body heat. Whatever cultural thing you're worried about comes second to staying alive." She nodded slowly. "You're right. I just wanted you to know." The temperature kept dropping as the planet's sun disappeared behind the storm clouds. Jake's suit was no longer providing any heat at all. He could feel the cold creeping into his bones. Sophie was worse off. Her lips were turning blue. "Come here," Jake said, opening the thermal blanket. "We do this now or we don't make it to nightfall." Sophie moved closer and they wrapped the blanket around both of them. Jake put his arms around her and she pressed against his chest. He could feel her shaking violently. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Nothing to be sorry for. This is survival, that's all." They sat like that as the temperature continued to fall. Jake kept Sophie close, sharing what little warmth his body could provide. The wind screamed outside their shelter, and ice formed on the walls around them. Neither of them saw the figure watching from a thermal vent 50 meters away. A being made of living crystal, shimmering with inner light. The Terezi scout had been monitoring this region when she detected the crash. Now she watched the two humans with wonder and amazement. In all her years, she had never seen another species perform the bonding ritual. It was beautiful and moving. The way they held each other, sharing their life heat in the deadly cold. This was how Terezi married, how they became one. And these humans were doing it with such natural grace. The scout's name was Crystalline who sings dawn, though humans could never pronounce it properly. She recorded everything with her sensory organs, knowing her people would want to witness this moment. Two humans, alone on the ice, choosing each other in the face of death. Dawn retreated into the warmth below the surface to report what she had seen. Above, Jake and Sophie held each other through the long, frozen night, unaware that their simple act of survival had just changed everything between their two species. The night lasted 14 hours on Kelvara 9. Jake spent every minute of it awake, keeping watch while Sophie drifted in and out of sleep against his chest. The small heating unit had died after the first hour, and now they had only each other and the thin thermal blanket. Sophie mumbled something in her sleep and pressed closer. Jake tightened his arms around her. He had done cold weather survival training in the Marines, but this was different. This wasn't an exercise. This was real, and if they made any mistakes, they would both die. The storm outside the cave grew worse as the hours passed. Jake could hear the wind tearing across the ice, a constant howl that never stopped. Sometimes he thought he heard other sounds beneath it, like singing or chimes, but he figured it was just his tired mind playing tricks. When the first gray light of dawn appeared, Sophie finally woke up properly. She blinked up at Jake, confused for a moment, then seemed to remember where they were. "You stayed awake all night?" she asked. "Someone had to. How are you feeling?" "Cold, tired, alive." She sat up slowly, and immediately the temperature between them dropped. They both felt it. "The storm is still going." Jake checked his suit's communicator.
"Still nothing but static."
"We need to stay put. Moving in this weather would kill us faster than waiting." They ate half a ration bar each and shared water from the recycler. The food was tasteless, but it gave them something to do. Sophie kept glancing at the cave entrance like she was expecting someone. "What is it?" Jake asked. "I keep thinking about the Terezi. If one of them saw us last night, would that be a problem?" Sophie hesitated. "I'm not sure. Their culture is so different from ours. Physical contact, sharing warmth that means something very specific to them, something permanent." Jake didn't like the sound of that. "What do you mean permanent?" Before Sophie could answer, they heard a sound from outside. Not the wind. Something else. A musical tone rising and falling like a song. Jake moved to the cave entrance and looked out. The storm had lessened slightly, and in the gray light he could see figures moving across the ice. They glowed with an inner light, crystalline bodies that reflected and refracted the dim sunlight. There were 3 of them moving with purpose toward the cave. "Terezi," Sophie breathed, coming to stand beside him. "They're a rescue team." The beings approached until they stood just outside the cave. Up close, Jake could see they were beautiful in an alien way. Their bodies were made of something like living glass with colors shifting beneath the surface. They were roughly human-shaped, but clearly not human. One of them stepped forward and made a series of chiming sounds. The temperature around it increased slightly, and Jake realized this was how they communicated. Sophie pulled out her translation device, but it had been damaged in the crash. She tried it anyway, and a garbled voice came out. The Terezi tilted its head, then placed one crystalline hand on the device. Suddenly the translation cleared. "We are honored to find you well," the Terezi said. Its voice sounded like wind chimes. "The bonding ritual you performed was witnessed. Your courage in the face of death has moved many hearts in the cities below." Jake and Sophie looked at each other. "Bonding ritual?" Jake asked. "Yes, the sharing of life heat, the choosing of each other over the cold. It is the most sacred act of our people." The Terezi gestured to the other 2 with it. We have come to bring you to our city where you may rest and recover as honored guests. Sophie's face had gone pale. Wait, there's been a misunderstanding. We were just trying to survive. In human culture, sharing warmth doesn't mean, please, the Teresi interrupted gently. You must be exhausted. Come with us. We will provide you with shelter and warmth. All questions can be answered when you are safe. The other two Teresi produced what looked like heated pods, small vehicles designed to travel across the ice. They gestured for Jake and Sophie to climb inside. Jake looked at Sophie. She seemed torn but finally nodded. They were in no condition to refuse help, and the Teresi seemed friendly enough. They climbed into the pods, which immediately filled with comfortable warmth. The journey to the Teresi city took less than an hour. The pods moved smoothly across the ice following the rescue team. Jake watched through the clear top as they approached what looked like a massive crater in the ice. Heat shimmered above it, and he could see structures made of crystal and metal built into the walls. They descended into the crater on a spiral path. The temperature rose steadily, becoming almost tropical by the time they reached the bottom. The city was incredible. Buildings made of crystal that glowed with inner light connected by bridges and walkways. Teresi moved through the streets in groups, their bodies pulsing with different colors as they communicated. The pod stopped in front of a large building near the center of the city. The rescue team helped Jake and Sophie out and led them inside. The interior was warm and comfortable, with furniture that seemed to adjust itself to their human shapes. These will be your quarters, the lead Teresi said. Food and water will be provided. Please rest. Tomorrow the elders wish to meet with you and celebrate your bonding. Wait, Sophie said again. Please, I need to explain. But the Teresi were already leaving, bowing deeply before they closed the door. Jake and Sophie stood in the middle of the room, looking at each other. This is bad, Sophie said quietly. Why? They rescued us. They're giving us a place to stay. Because they think we're married, Jake. In their culture, what we did last night is how they get married. They share body heat, they press close together, and that creates a permanent bond between them. It's not just symbolic. It's biological. When two Teresi bond like that, their crystal structures actually merge slightly. They become linked for life. Jake sat down on one of the strange chairs. But we're not Teresi. We're human. We were just trying not to freeze to death. I know that. You know that. But try explaining it to them. How do you tell a species that their most sacred ritual is something we do casually when we're cold? Before Jake could answer, there was a chiming sound at the door. A young Teresi entered, carrying what looked like a sculpture made of ice and crystal. It was beautiful, with light flowing through it in patterns. A gift, the Teresi said shyly, to honor your bonding. May your heat always flow together. The being placed the sculpture on a table and left before either human could respond. Sophie walked over and examined it closely. This is a traditional wedding gift, she said softly. Jake, I think we're in serious trouble. Outside their quarters, the news was spreading through the city. The humans had bonded. They had performed the sacred ritual on the frozen surface, trusting each other with their very lives. It was romantic. It was beautiful. It was the talk of every thermal vent and crystal hall, and neither Jake nor Sophie had any idea how to fix the misunderstanding without creating a diplomatic disaster. Jake woke up to find Sophie already awake, pacing back and forth across their quarters. She had barely slept, he could tell. The wedding sculpture sat on the table, catching the light from the crystal walls. We need to tell them, Sophie said without preamble. Before this gets worse, Jake sat up and rubbed his face. Tell them what? That we appreciate the rescue, but we're not actually married? Exactly that. Sophie stopped pacing and turned to face him. I've been thinking about this all night. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to explain. We need to be honest with them. Before Jake could respond, the door chimed. A Teresi entered, different from the ones they had met before. This one was larger, with deeper colors swirling in its crystal body. It moved with authority. Good morning, the Teresi said through the translation device. I am Chris Melody, Ambassador to Human Relations. The elders have asked me to attend to you during your stay. Sophie stepped forward immediately. Ambassador, we need to talk to you about what happened on the surface. There's been a misunderstanding. Chris Melody tilted its head, and the colors in its body shifted to what might have been curiosity. A misunderstanding? Please explain. Sophie took a deep breath. When Jake and I were on the surface, we were trying to survive. Our suits were damaged and we were freezing to death. We huddled together for warmth because that's what humans do in cold environments. It's a survival technique, not a bonding ritual. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment. The colors in its body shifted through several patterns, like it was thinking, or maybe communicating with others far away. I see, Chris Melody finally said. You are saying that the sharing of life heat does not create a permanent bond between humans? That's right, Jake said, standing up. We barely know each other. We were just shipmates before the crash. What you saw was emergency survival, nothing more. The ambassador's body pulsed with colors that the humans couldn't read. This is difficult to understand. When Terezi share their core heat, when they press close and trust another with their warmth, they become bonded. Their crystal structures merge. They are linked forever. You are saying humans can do this without creating such a bond? Humans don't have crystal structures, Sophie explained. Our bodies work differently. We can share warmth with anyone, friends, family, even strangers if we need to. It doesn't mean we're married or bonded or anything like that. Chris Melody moved closer to them and they could feel the heat radiating from its body. Show me, it said. Show me how you shared warmth. Sophie and Jake looked at each other uncomfortably. You want us to demonstrate? Jake asked. Please. I must understand this to explain it to the elders. Jake shrugged and opened his arms. Sophie stepped close and they hugged, the way they had in the ice cave. It felt awkward doing it for an audience, but they held the position for several seconds. Like this, Sophie said. Humans put their arms around each other, press close, share body heat. It's practical. The ambassador watched them with what might have been fascination or horror. Its colors shifted rapidly. And this does not bind you together? You can separate and walk away as if it never happened? Yes, Jake said. We can do this with anyone. It's not special. Not special, Chris Melody repeated slowly. You performed our most sacred ritual, the ultimate act of trust and intimacy, and you say it is not special. Sophie realized they were making it worse. It's not that it's not important. It's just that for humans, this isn't how we form bonds. We form bonds through time, through shared experiences, through emotional connections. The physical act of sharing warmth is just practical. The ambassador was silent again. Then it said something that chilled both humans more than the frozen surface had. I must report this to the council. Please wait here. Chris Melody left and Jake and Sophie stood in the middle of the room, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. They were two humans in an alien city, deep below the ice, surrounded by a species that thought they had violated something sacred. That went badly, Jake said. I know. Sophie sat down, her shoulders slumping. They don't understand us at all. How can we explain that humans evolved to be adaptable? That we can work with strangers, share resources, cooperate without permanent bonds? It's one of our greatest strengths, but to them it must seem reckless, Jake finished. Or worse, hours passed. Food was brought to them by a young Terezi who wouldn't make eye contact and left quickly. The sounds of the city filtered through their walls, but no one came to explain what was happening. Finally, as the light from the city began to dim toward what passed for evening, Chris Melody returned. The ambassador was not alone. Several other Terezi followed, their bodies glowing with different colors and patterns. The council has convened, Chris Melody said formally. They wish to understand what has happened. Please come with us. Jake and Sophie followed the group through the crystal streets. Other Terezi stopped to watch them pass. Some bowed. Others made sounds like wind chimes, creating melodies that followed the humans as they walked. They entered a large building at the center of the city. Inside was a circular chamber with Terezi arranged around the edges. At the center was a raised platform of crystal that pulsed with warmth. Please stand there, Chris Melody said. Gesturing to the platform, Jake and Sophie climbed onto it, and immediately they could feel dozens of Terezi focusing on them. The temperature in the room shifted, and Jake realized the aliens were communicating, sharing information through heat and maybe other senses humans didn't have. An elderly Terezi stepped forward, its body darker and more complex than the others. I am Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth. We have heard of your actions on the surface. We have also heard your explanation. We must understand something. The elder moved closer, and Jake could feel waves of heat coming from it, like questions being asked without words. If you can share your warmth without bonding, if you can trust each other with your lives without commitment, then what does bind you? How do humans choose their mates? How do you know who to trust? Sophie stepped forward. We choose through time, through learning about each other, through shared values and emotions. Physical closeness can be part of that, but it's not the defining moment. The bond comes gradually, not all at once. Gradually, the elder repeated, over time. So when you shared warmth in the ice cave, you were not choosing each other. We were choosing to survive, Jake said. We were choosing to help each other live. That's all. The chamber filled with chiming sounds as the Terezi discussed this among themselves. The temperature fluctuated wildly. Finally, Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth raised one crystalline hand and the room fell silent. This is difficult for us to accept, the elder said. What you describe is alien to everything we know. But we must also accept that you are alien to us. Your ways are not our ways. The elder paused, its body shifting through colors. There is another concern. Your human ship will come for you soon. When they arrive, what will you tell them about us? That we imprisoned you? That we misunderstood your actions? Sophie shook her head quickly. No, we'll tell them you saved our lives. That you showed us hospitality. That there was a cultural misunderstanding that we're working to resolve. And the bonding that never was? The elder asked. What becomes of that? Jake looked at Sophie, then back at the elder. Maybe we can all learn from it. Humans and Terezi are different, but we can still work together. We can still understand each other, even if it takes time. The elder was quiet for a long time. Then it bowed, a gesture the other Terezi copied. Then let us try. The news that the humans were not actually bonded spread through the Terezi city like a shockwave. Jake and Sophie could feel the change in how they were treated. The bowing stopped. The admiring glances turned to confused stares. Some Terezi seemed upset, others merely puzzled. Chris Melody visited them the next morning, its body colors muted and uncertain. The human rescue ship has entered orbit, the ambassador said. They will arrive at the city within hours. However, there is a problem. What kind of problem? Jake asked. The council is divided. Some believe you have done nothing wrong, that this is simply a difference between our species. Others feel uncomfortable with what happened. They ask how your kind can share such intimacy without meaning, without consequence. Sophie frowned. We didn't mean to offend anyone. We were just trying to live. I understand this, Chris Melody said, its colors shifting to warmer tones. But understanding here, it tapped its crystalline head, is different from understanding here. It touched its chest, where its core glowed. Terezi feel connections physically. The idea that you can share heat, can trust each other so completely yet walk away as strangers. It troubles many. Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, he could see Terezi moving through the streets, going about their daily lives. What are they most afraid of? He asked quietly. Chris Melody was silent for a moment. That you are careless. That if humans can share their most vulnerable moments with anyone, without commitment, then perhaps you cannot be trusted in other ways. If sharing warmth means nothing to you, what else might mean nothing? Sophie's eyes widened. That's not fair. Just because we approach bonding differently doesn't mean we're careless or untrustworthy. I know this in my mind, the ambassador said, but you asked what they fear. I am telling you. A young Terezi entered the room bowing to Chris Melody. They exchanged heat patterns too quick for the translation device to follow. Then the young one left and the ambassador turned back to the humans. The human diplomatic team is asking to speak with you. They have concerns about the situation here. Jake and Sophie were led to a communication chamber. On the screen, they saw Commander Lisa Grant, the head of human operations in the sector. She looked tired and worried. Martinez Hayes, good to see you both alive, Grant said. We've been in contact with the Terezi government. They've explained the situation. I need to know from you directly. Are you being held against your will? No, ma'am, Jake said. The Terezi saved our lives. They've been treating us well. There's been a cultural misunderstanding, that's all. Grant nodded slowly. A misunderstanding about marriage rituals. Hayes, you're the xenobiologist. You should have known better. Sophie felt her face flush. With respect, Commander, I was freezing to death. Understanding alien culture seemed less important than staying alive. I'm not criticizing your survival instinct, Grant said, her voice softening slightly. But this has created a diplomatic situation. The Terezi are important allies. We need their thermal technology for our colonies. If they think humans are culturally reckless or disrespectful, It could damage relations for years. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. So what are you saying? We should have frozen to death to avoid offending them? I'm saying you need to fix this, Grant replied firmly. The Terezi ambassador has requested that you stay and help explain human culture to their people. They want to understand us better. I'm authorizing you to remain on Kelvara 9 as cultural liaisons until this is resolved. The screen went dark before either of them could protest. They looked at each other, then at Chris Melody, who had been listening quietly. Your commander is wise, the ambassador said. Knowledge is the path to understanding. Will you help us learn about humanity? Sophie sighed. What do you want to know? Over the next several days, Jake and Sophie became teachers. They met with groups of Terezi, explaining human biology, human culture, human relationships. It was exhausting and sometimes frustrating, trying to bridge the gap between two species that saw the world so differently. The hardest part was explaining human emotions. The Terezi understood physical connections, temperature, proximity, but human love, human friendship, human trust, these were concepts that existed in the mind and heart, not just in shared warmth. When humans fall in love, Sophie explained to one group, it's a process. We spend time together. We talk, we laugh, we share experiences. Physical closeness can be part of it, but it's not the beginning. It's not the moment of bonding. A young Terezi raised a crystalline hand. But how do you know? How do you know when the bond is real if there is no physical moment of joining? Sophie thought about it. We feel it. It's different for everyone. Some humans know right away. Others take years to be sure. But the important thing is that we choose it. Both people have to choose the bond actively and consciously. And you can unchoose it? Another Terezi asked. You can walk away from a bond? Sometimes, Jake said. Not all human relationships last forever. Sometimes people change or they realize they're not right for each other. It's painful, but it happens. The room filled with confused chiming sounds. The Terezi clearly found this concept disturbing. For them, bonding was permanent. The idea of choosing to separate from a bonded partner was almost incomprehensible. After the session ended, Jake and Sophie walked back to their quarters in silence. They were both tired, both frustrated with trying to explain something that felt so natural to them but so alien to the Terezi. Do you think they'll ever really understand? Sophie asked. I don't know. Do we really understand them? They reached their quarters and went inside. The wedding sculpture was still there, a reminder of the confusion that started all this. Sophie walked over and touched it gently. The crystal was cool and smooth under her fingers. Jake, can I ask you something personal? Sure. If we had known what it meant to them, would you have done it differently? Would you have tried something else to survive? Jake considered the question seriously. No, I would have done exactly the same thing. Survival comes first. Culture, tradition, ritual, none of that matters if you're dead, Sophie nodded. That's very human of you. Is that bad?
No, she said quietly.
It's actually what makes us strong. We're adaptable. We do what needs to be done. The Terezi, they have their rituals and their bonds, and those things give them stability. But we have flexibility. We can work with anyone, cooperate with strangers, trust people we just met if the situation calls for it. That's not careless. That's survival. Jake walked over to stand beside her, looking at the sculpture. You should tell them that. Not as a scientist explaining biology, but as a human explaining what makes us who we are. You think they'd listen? Only one way to find out. The next day, Sophie requested a meeting with the full council. Chris Melody arranged it, though the ambassador seemed uncertain about what Sophie wanted to say. Standing in the council chamber again, with dozens of Terezi watching her, Sophie felt nervous. But she thought about what Jake had said, about survival, about humanity, about who they really were. I want to tell you a story, she began, about how humans came to be the way we are. She explained how humans evolved on a dangerous world, where survival meant adapting to any environment. She talked about how early humans had to cooperate with strangers from other tribes to hunt large prey, how they had to share food with people they barely knew or everyone would starve, how they learned to trust quickly, work together immediately, and form temporary alliances that could dissolve when they were no longer needed. We didn't evolve with permanent bonds like you have, Sophie said. We evolved with flexible cooperation, the ability to trust anyone if the situation requires it, to share resources, share warmth, Share danger with people we might never see again. It's not careless. It's the opposite. It's careful adaptation to a chaotic world. The chamber was silent. Then Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth spoke. So when you shared warmth in the ice cave, you were demonstrating the core of human nature? The ability to trust immediately, cooperate without permanent commitment, survive through adaptation? Yes, Sophie said. That's exactly it. The Elder's body pulsed with deep, slow colors. Then perhaps we have been looking at this incorrectly. Perhaps what we saw was not a failed bonding ritual, but a successful display of human capability. The council chamber erupted in chiming sounds as the Terezi discussed Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth's words. Sophie stood on the platform waiting, hoping she had finally gotten through to them. Beside her, Jake stood quietly, but she could feel his presence. Solid, reliable, the same way she had felt it in the ice cave. Chris Melody stepped forward, its body glowing with warm colors. The Elder raises an important point. We have been judging human actions by Terezi standards, but humans are not Terezi. Their strengths are different from ours. Another council member spoke up, its voice like crystal bells. But are these strengths compatible with ours? Can we build an alliance with beings who form bonds so easily and break them just as easily? Sophie shook her head. We don't break bonds easily. When humans commit to something, to someone, we mean it. The difference is that we choose when to make that commitment. We don't let biology or ritual choose for us. We use our minds, our hearts, our judgment. So you are saying, the Elder began slowly, that humans have the ability to cooperate intimately without bonding, but also have the ability to bond deeply when they choose to do so. Yes, Jake said, speaking for the first time. In the ice cave, Sophie and I chose to keep each other alive. That was a choice and it mattered. But it wasn't a choice to bond forever. If we had died out there, we would have died as colleagues, maybe friends working together to survive. Nothing more was needed, and nothing more should be expected, Sophie added. We didn't fail at bonding. We succeeded at surviving. The Terezi fell silent again. Sophie could see lights moving through their crystalline bodies. Patterns of communication she couldn't fully understand. Finally, Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth raised both hands. I propose we create a new understanding, the Elder said. What the humans did was not our bonding ritual because they are not us. But it was an act of profound cooperation and trust. We should honor it as such, not as a failed marriage, but as a successful demonstration of human adaptability. The other council members chimed their agreement. The tension in the room began to ease. Chris Melody approached Sophie and Jake, its colors bright and warm. We will create a new term in our cultural database, the ambassador said, survival partners. It will describe humans who share intimacy for practical reasons, who trust each other deeply but temporarily. It will help us understand your kind better. Sophie felt relief wash over her. Thank you. That means a lot. But I have a question, Chris Melody continued, tilting its head in that curious way. Now that time has passed, now that you have shared many experiences here, have you chosen to bond? In the human way? Sophie and Jake looked at each other. It was a fair question, but neither of them had an easy answer. Before the crash, they had barely known each other. Jake was the ship's pilot, ex-military, practical, and straightforward. Sophie was the scientist, always thinking, always analyzing. They had been friendly colleagues, nothing more, but now, after everything they had been through together, after explaining their own culture to aliens and defending their choices, after depending on each other in ways they had never expected, what were they now? I don't know, Sophie said honestly. We're still figuring that out. The Elder made a sound like wind chimes in a soft breeze. That is very human. To not know but to continue anyway. We Terezi would find such uncertainty difficult. But perhaps that is your strength. The ability to exist in the unknown and not be afraid. The formal part of the meeting ended, and the council members departed one by one. Jake and Sophie were led back to their quarters by Chris Melody, who seemed much more relaxed than before. Your ship will take you home tomorrow, the ambassador said, but you are always welcome to return to Kelvara 9. You have helped us understand humanity better than any diplomat or scientist before you. That is a gift we will not forget. After the ambassador left, Jake and Sophie stood in their quarters, surrounded by the gifts that Terezi had given them over the past days. The wedding sculpture still sat on the table, but now it meant something different, not a symbol of a bond that never existed, but a reminder of a misunderstanding that led to greater understanding. We should probably talk, Jake said, sitting down on one of the strange chairs. Sophie sat across from him. About what the ambassador asked? Yeah, about us. Sophie smiled slightly. You know, before the crash I thought you were kind of boring. Quiet pilot who kept to himself, very by the book, and now? Now I know you're the kind of person who stays awake all night in freezing temperatures to keep watch. Who trusts a scientist's knowledge about alien cultures even when it seems crazy? Who stands up to a council of aliens and explains humanity like it's the most natural thing in the world? Jake rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable with the praise. I also know you're braver than you think you are, and smarter than anyone I've ever met. And when I was holding you in that ice cave, I wasn't just thinking about survival. I was thinking that I didn't want you to die. Not for the mission, not for humanity. Just because you're you. Sophie felt her heart beat faster. Jake, I'm not saying we're bonded the way the Teresi mean it, he continued. I'm just saying maybe we could figure out what we are. Take our time. Do it the human way. Sophie stood up and walked over to where he sat. She held out her hand and he took it. The touch was warm, familiar. Like it had been in the ice cave, but different now. Chosen, not forced by circumstance. I'd like that, she said. The next morning, Crystalline, who sings Dawn, came to see them off. The young scout had been the one to witness their original survival in the ice cave, and she seemed both embarrassed and fascinated by how things had turned out. I am sorry for the confusion I caused, Dawn said, her body pulsing with apologetic colors. I thought I was witnessing something sacred. I did not understand human ways, Sophie smiled at her. You were witnessing something important, just not what you thought. You saw two humans choosing to trust each other, to work together, to survive against the odds. That's pretty sacred to us in its own way. Will you bond? Dawn asked shyly. Eventually. In the human way? Jake and Sophie exchanged a glance. Maybe, Jake said. Time will tell. We have time, Sophie added. That's the thing about humans. We don't have to decide everything in one moment. We can let things develop naturally. Dawn seemed to find this fascinating. How strange and wonderful. To live with such uncertainty. To not know your future, but to step into it anyway. As they boarded the human shuttle, Sophie looked back at the Teresi city one last time. It had been terrifying and confusing and frustrating. But it had also been incredible. They had survived a crash, survived the cold, and survived a cultural crisis that could have damaged relations between two species. Not bad for a week's work. On the shuttle, Jake sat beside her. Closer than colleagues usually sat, but not quite as close as partners. Somewhere in between, figuring it out as they went. So, Jake said as the shuttle lifted off from the ice planet. Want to get coffee when we get back to the station? Sophie laughed. Is that the human way of asking someone on a date? I think so. I'm still figuring it out. Me too, Sophie said. But yes, coffee sounds good. The shuttle rose through the atmosphere, leaving the frozen world behind. Below them, in the Teresi city, Chris Melody stood with Elder Pulse of the Deep Earth watching the humans depart. Do you think they will bond? The ambassador asked. The Elder's colors shifted to something that might have been amusement. I do not know, but I think that is exactly how it should be. Humans do not follow our paths. They make their own. And that is why they are strong, Chris Melody said. Yes, the Elder agreed. That is why they are strong. In the shuttle, Sophie rested her head on Jake's shoulder, not because she was cold, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And that, she thought, made all the difference. The stars stretched out before them, full of possibilities. Some things in life required immediate decisions. Life or death, survive or freeze. But other things, the important things, could take time, could develop naturally, could be chosen again and again, day after day, until the choice became something deeper than ritual or biology. It became human. And somewhere on the frozen world below, a crystalline being began to understand that maybe, just maybe, that was the most sacred thing of all, the freedom to choose, the courage to wait, the wisdom to let bonds form in their own time, their own way. Jake squeezed Sophie's hand gently. She squeezed back. Whatever they were becoming, whatever they would be, they would figure it out together. The human way, one day at a time.